Hey, this is Caleb, part of the Narrate team. Thanks for listening to the Narrate podcast. This week, our lead pastor, Adam Hushka, sits down and has a conversation with our worship pastor, Kate Plummer. It's an intriguing conversation about the value of singing and what singing can do both for us and for God.
Hi, happy spring break, or not happy spring break, depending on your view of that. Kate made the observation last gathering that video, it should have went by the Death Star, which would have been kind of fun. So there you go. There's creative team and all that we're trying to figure out and the ideas that we miss. If you haven't been with us yet in this series, we are going to finish up a conversation this morning, so you're kind of catching us at the end of the show, but I think we can make it self-contained. We started a conversation a couple weeks ago that we're calling Samuel, and really we started the conversation by asking this question about pain. And listen, if we could just allow for the fact that pain is a complicated topic, that it's a very personal topic, and that oftentimes when we start talking about purpose to pain, that oftentimes comes across as very trite and superficial, and sometimes us spiritual people can kind of put a Jesus Band-Aid over something and pretend like that solves the problem, and it doesn't really solve the problem. But what we said at the beginning of the series is if we'll allow for all that tension, if we'll allow that we're not going to solve that it's just there to be managed, if you will, could we also ask this question of what if there's purpose to your pain? In fact, really what we said is what if sometimes you find your purpose, whether it be for a season or a lifetime, but by delving into the pain? And what that speaks to is, we are a people that have to have purpose. That's not new to you. It's not new to me. Whether you're studying it from psychology or from the scriptures, you see that a person who doesn't have a sense of purpose very quickly will be a person that won't be alive any longer, because you just have to have purpose. And sometimes in college or even in our 20s, and sometimes beyond that, we find our purpose through these very motivational moments where someone says, hey, if failure wasn't an option, what would you do? If money were no obstacle, what would you do? And those are very helpful, kind of go for it, take the risk, do it kind of moments. And yet what we've been exploring, thanks in large part to a woman named Hannah, who we find in the story of 1 Samuel, what we've been exploring is that sometimes the bottom falls out of life. Sometimes things don't go the way you thought they would. Sometimes you find yourself in the type of marriage that you just thought you would read about in magazines. Sometimes you find yourself dealing with a very real physical or even mental disease. Sometimes life hands you something and you didn't ask for it, and it seems that any sense of purpose has suddenly been robbed. And what we've been saying in this series is, what if sometimes you find your purpose by delving into the pain? What if sometimes what it means to live in community is to stop stuffing it and stop pretending and stop moving past it without dealing with it? So what if sometimes we need you to delve into it? Because sometimes the people who can speak most profoundly to the things that makes life real are the people who have actually dealt with the pain. And I'm real honored. I've had several conversations with several of you who, there's been some very real observations made in that process. And then last week, we continued along the line, and really last week, I think we just stopped and asked what is, in my mind, it's the skeptical, cynical question that follows very natural from the first question. And that's just simply once found, why is purpose so easily forgotten? Why is it so easily lost? Because the reality is I'm sure you've worked for a company and the boss went off to the conference and he came home with these, or she came home with these really big ideas, and there was a new plaque put on the wall and everybody was really excited for it for about a week. And then the real life stuff started happening again. Or maybe you're someone that's I don't have time to think about this because there's diapers to be changed and kids to be gotten to school, and there's the reality of a mortgage payment to be made. And sometimes, I guess my point is, sometimes living with this heightened sense of purpose is a luxury that your life just doesn't afford you. Sometimes survival is the only thing that you can pay attention to. And so last week we just asked the question of why? Why is your sense of purpose when you stand at the altar so rich? And a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, there's a sense of why did I do this? Why can you move in a direction with incredible conviction and so quickly forget about it? And so last week we talked about the sons of Eli, and hopefully, if nothing else, asked the question of, is the intention to read about these wicked, corrupt priests and conclude that they were evil and you're not? Or was the intention of reading about them to go, wait a minute, that happens to all of us. That's the human problem. And this morning, I want to wrap it up But in this conversation, though it's a quick one, I know, I want to wrap this whole thing up by asking the question of how do you think about your ultimate purpose? Now, we word it like that because we're a church, and so you kind of already get the answer, like just fill in the blank, God or Jesus. Like you already know what I'm going to say, and probably many of you have already ascribed to that. You've already believed that. You already aligned your life to that. Some of you are wrestling with that. That's great too. So I'm not asking like, well, how would you answer the test, the question on the test, but to begin to think about like, how do you actually process your purpose? And for me, this is born out of this tension of, I don't know about you, but when you start asking me about my purpose, I find myself just starting to go like, okay, which one? Because I'm a spouse, and I'm a parent, and I'm an employee, I'm a leader, I'm a Christ follower, I'm a community member, I'm a son, I'm an uncle, I'm a brother. Like, which purpose do you want to talk about? And I have a friend who's very good at delving into every purpose he has and setting goals for that every year, and I try, and I'm just like, I can't even think about that. This morning, I guess what I want to ask is what if there's a keystone purpose, if you will? I'm not talking about the pipeline, nor am I trying to be political, but maybe you've heard recent research on, that was funny, right? Like, this is spontaneous and funny. Oh, okay. So maybe you've heard recent research on this idea of a keystone habit. And what people in the business and psychology world are beginning to recognize is that most successful organizations, as well as most successful people, thriving, healthy people, they have what are called keystone habits. And there's one or there's two or there's three. And what they're finding is that all other habits delineate from that one or that two. And so if you can find like what's the one or the two or the three things you have to do or your company has to win at, then everything else will take care of itself naturally. I guess this morning I want to ask the question, how do you think about your keystone habit? It's ethereal, it's esoteric, it has the potential to be hoity-toity talk about stuff that doesn't really matter in the real life. But this morning I want to take a word that is very, very foreign, and it's this word worship. And it's very churchy, and it's very loaded, and it's very inaccessible. And if you were to say to someone like, I'm going to worship, they'd go like, what? Is that a cult? Like, I don't understand that. And I guess what I want to do is take this concept and go, why does it matter? And what does it mean to say that you live your life to worship God? And what would it mean should you say that's what you're deciding or what you have decided? And there's a story in the New Testament that I think captures this so brilliantly. It's about a guy named John the Baptist. And if you're not familiar with John the Baptist, it's hard to remember this, but long before there was a Jesus, there was a guy named John the Baptist, and he was the biggest deal in town. In fact, he wasn't just the biggest deal in town, he was the biggest deal in the country. And in many ways, he was the biggest deal they had seen since a guy named Moses. And this was like people who had been ridiculed, who were very, very dejected in their own sense of identity. Nothing good had happened for the people of Israel for hundreds and hundreds of years. And this guy named John the Baptist, he showed up, and it was a big deal. And suddenly, hundreds and then thousands of people were coming to John for answers. Suddenly, there was this, what they would call revival happening in the hearts of the people. And there was this profound hope of maybe this guy, John, is finally our guy. He built big places, big buildings with big steeples, if you know what I mean. In fact, he gained so much respect within his country that the authorities down in Jerusalem, like the guys from D.C., they made the trip up to the backwoods and they started asking John the Baptist, like, okay, what's the deal here? What's going on here? How are you doing this? How are you getting these results? And John's response was he deflected things very quickly. The text in describing John says he did not fail to confess, but confessed freely, I'm not the Messiah. So everyone's coming to him going, you're the biggest thing we've seen in a long time. You must be the one. And he's going, no. Let's just be clear. Other texts say, I'm not the Christ. I'm not your one. And life continues, and he continues to be a big deal. And then this guy named Yeshua, or Yeshu, some would say, this guy named Jesus, he shows up, and suddenly he is dwarfing anything John has accomplished. Like he was baptizing hundreds and thousands, and Jesus was baptizing perhaps tens of thousands. Whatever John was doing, Jesus was answering it tenfold. Like John used to be the best, the sexiest, the most popular, the most respected, and suddenly he'd been completely replaced. And I think you can all appreciate this from your own sector and your own experience of life. Like suddenly he wasn't the biggest deal in town anymore. And I can just picture that when his guys, when they showed up, because eventually his own followers, they showed up to John and they're like, John, what is the deal here? They're freaking out because their boss is being replaced. And John, his response was, it's pretty loaded. To this, John replied, this is to his guys who are going like, wait a minute, like, he's baptized him in your backyard in the same river, and he's getting 10 times the results. To this, John replied, a person can receive only what is given him from heaven. In other words, John's going, listen. Leadership is a stewardship. This isn't my party. This isn't my show. What I've been given, I've been given. Yes, what I have, I've been given. Yes, I'm responsible, but this is somebody else's. He continues, you yourselves can testify. I said, I'm not the Messiah. This was never about me, but I'm sent ahead of him. And then he uses an ancient, was current at the time, wedding metaphor. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine and is now complete. Now, in this culture, you didn't get a wedding invitation. You didn't get a save the date magnet, and everybody knew, like, here's the day the wedding's going to happen. There was a betrothal, an engagement that was legal marriage, and then there was this unknown, like, when is it actually going to happen thing, and everyone just kind of had to sit around and wait, and oftentimes it was the groom's dad who kicked into gear the actual ceremony, but the best man's job was to have his ear really close to the rail and know exactly when the wedding was happening and then draw everybody to the wedding when it was happening. John's going, hey, I'm that guy. I'm just looking toward the day. That's been my only role. And then he says this, he must become greater, and I must become less. Louis Giglio, when I first started to ask this question of myself, it was thanks to a book written by Louis Giglio called I Am Not, But I Know I Am. And Louis Giglio simply says it this way, John understood that the story has a star, and he's not it. Like John understood that the human story was that humans for hundreds and thousands of years had been hijacking a story that's ultimately about God. And John's going, listen, this was never about me. I am a steward. And all that gets us to this question of how do you think about ultimate purpose? And it really begs the question, what is worship? And it just so happens that we have a friend and someone on staff here at Narrate who has given more thought to this topic than I think anybody I know. And so I asked Kate, like, hey, Kate, would you preach on worship? And she said, no. And I said, really? And she said, well, if you interview me, then maybe we can do that. So this is all, what we're going to do is interview Kate, but she's got some really profound thoughts on this. And so will you help me welcome Kate up here? I'm just going to kind of draw her out on this. And her day did not start good because we were unloading our vehicles over in this drive over there. And I was like, because I was looking at ESPN while I was eating my omelet at 5:10 this morning. And I saw that Australia won the World Cup in cricket. And I was like, hey, Kate, Australians, they're the world champions. She's like, don't tell me I was going to watch that today. So
thanks a lot, Adam.
So now she can watch basketball.
Yeah, we won against New Zealand. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know what cricket was until I met you, but you say it's the second biggest sport in the world.
Yeah, behind soccer, it's the second most popular sport in the world.
But this is America.
World Cup, yeah.
Okay. So getting to this question of worship and what it is, what is your working understanding? If someone were to say, hey, Kate, what is worship? How do you, because you're the worship pastor, like what does that mean?
Right. Well, I would say worship is one of those words, much like the word love, that the more you try to describe it, the more difficult it is to describe and really to get across, because a lot of it is expression and a lot of it is acknowledgement. There's just so much involved. And so when you start saying words, you start remembering everything else you've left out. So
yeah, welcome to my world.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think when we first started having this conversation, that to me was a very fitting and profound starting point, because one of the things that we've worked on really hard around here, going back to day one literally, is to go, worship is not limited to this, and it's not limited to music, but whatever vocation you're in, whatever life invites you into during the week, like when you do that with God's name and glory in mind, that's worship.
Yeah.
So we've worked hard to take it out of the building and the logo off of the thing. And that's kind of where you're taking us back to, is worship is much more than a song.
Absolutely. If I was going to try and put into words, I would say that worship is anything that is intentionally done for the glory of God. So music and art and all that kind of stuff is just one of those things. But it's definitely something that we connect with God in a really incredible way because, like the words we sing are just words. But when you layer your purpose and story on that, and then what God does in that, then all of a sudden you've got something that's unbelievable, and it changes week to week.
So really then where that gets into is we move quickly from the question of what is worship into this thing that we do on Sunday called singing. And it's this question of, like, why do we sing? And I think it's a question that lots of people ask, and in many cases is very foreign. Like, what is the value of singing together? Are we just trying to build people's emotion for a mediocre sermon, or what are we doing? So, and you've given a lot of thought to this as well. Like, why do we sing together? What is the value of that?
Okay, so if we just say the word sing, we're not saying worship yet. So we say, why do we sing together? So thinking about that question prompted me to a story in my life about, 4 years ago or so, when I was in Sweden. And
is everybody blonde in Sweden?
Yeah.
Blue eyes?
Mostly, yep.
Yeah. We call them Minnesotans.
Yeah, that's right. And yes, so I was there visiting my friend Frida, who I met in Minnesota. So
Frida, right? Like
you're exactly
Sweden, Frida,
correct.
it just makes sense.
That's
Everybody's
right.
name's Frida. They're all Vikings fans.
Pretty much.
Yeah. It's an international sport is football. It's the third biggest in the world.
It really isn't.
But our vote counts as 4.
Yeah, you're right. Rugby union is. Rugby union would be. That's another form of football. Anyway, yeah, so I was in Sweden and I was visiting Frida. She's a great friend. And I was in Stockholm. And she invited me along to this gathering of people on a Wednesday night. It wasn't church, but it was in a huge auditorium. It's probably 800 or so seat auditorium. And there was it wasn't completely full, but it was pretty close. There was 500-600 people in there. And so we walked in and we paid our 10 euros or whatnot, and among other people, and they ask you what your voice is, and they seat you according to your voice. So, on one side of the auditorium,
like
there
better.
Yeah, that's right. The good people really close to the front. So they have soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. So that's your vocal range. So soprano being high and bass being low. And so we're all sitting there, and then these 2 guys walk out on stage. They're brothers. One of them's a keyboard player, and the other one's a singer. And the singer started leading us through, with the help of his brother, some singing exercises, and in the form of scales and Swedish nursery rhymes and all sorts of things. And then as we go through, and people start to get comfortable, and it really doesn't take very long at all for that to happen, about 5 minutes, you start to feel the energy in the room. And he was pretty much got to a point where we were playing, he was teaching us, pop songs, English songs, Swedish songs, whatnot. But because he was teaching us these cool harmony parts, he was playing us like an instrument, So you guys now, and then you guys, and you just hear these incredible sounds come through. I think, that's the closest I've ever got to Paul Simon's Graceland, like that Lady Blacksmith Mombasa, like all the African voices and things. Not quite like that, but it was just all these different things going on that you could never do yourself at home, So there was this energy, and there was this creativity, and there was this connection that we all had. We were being unified by the experience. So. And
you were saying that you noted that their facial expression and overall presence was entirely different as they left versus when they arrived.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's what prompted me to think of it, because the real interesting thing to me was the lobby, the people in the lobby. So when you walked in,
translation lobby.
Oh, yeah, foyer, is it? Vestibule? I don't know, area out there. So people were coming in where the doors are. They come in, and so people were just it was a Wednesday night. They got their Wednesday faces on. It's you're in the thick of it. There's lots of stuff going on through the week. They've made time for this, but they're not connected to it yet. They're just arriving. When they left, the difference was on their faces. There was just energy, there's excitement, there was just a look, an expression of released joy. And so just singing together had produced that. We haven't added God to the equation yet. And so I was reading this interesting article in Time magazine that was talking about the value of singing, just group singing.
Not even Christian, just singing.
Yeah, there's over 270,000, arranged choruses and things in America. So it was really interesting to the health benefits of that. It relieves anxiety, it relieves stress, it releases endorphins. It's much like exercise, but there's an emotional component to it as well because there's connection, So you don't get that connection through a Facebook or a screen because you're automatically bigger than that screen, aren't you? So you're never going to get that. But when you're in a group of people and there's people surrounding you, it's huge because you've got their energy going along with yours. So, so I was talking about how singing had a calming yet energizing effect on people.
Yet another instance of how current science and the text are not at odds with each other, but really complementing because God has been talking about singing together for a couple thousand years.
Yeah, it's connected all the way through.
You had an experience more recently, and this gets personal, that adds even another layer beyond just the hormonal, emotional impacts of singing together, but what happens when we give voice to what it is we're thinking and feeling. Would you just share that with us?
Yeah. I was sharing with Adam that a few weeks ago I had, so I don't know if many of you guys know my mum, better known as Trendy Wendy. She has a good friend, she's known since she was 12 years old, Jen. They've been friends for over 50 years, so it's pretty incredible friendship. And so Jen's known as Auntie Jen, although it's not blood relative, it's, she's Auntie Jen and her husband's Uncle Steve, and they've known me and my family for all my life, so they're important people to me and to our family. And so I knew that Uncle Steve was sick. He'd been diagnosed last November, and he was just going downhill. And unfortunately, February this year, he passed away. And so it was one Saturday morning, and I knew that Mum had been spending a lot of time with Auntie Jen and Uncle Steve at the hospital, and I was kind of just in that mode of checking my emails and just hearing how everything's going. And Mum had sent me this message like at 6 o'clock in the morning. I woke up and I just immediately thinking of them, and I checked my messages, and there it was that Uncle Steve had passed away. And it was just, it's a real blow, and it's it's just devastating, and it's terrible to hear of when you're so far away from people you care about, and you can't help but think how it's impacting them and all that kind of stuff. And so there was a lot of stuff going around in my mind that morning, and I was just at home by myself and hadn't really said anything, but just in that state of sadness. And I sort of got to about early afternoon, and I thought, I can't stay like this, this is a bit much, and I really need to be intentional about calling somebody. So I called Teresa Anderson, because she's a lovely person. She plays on team. And most people called Teresa, which is a lot of in Helena, are really nice. And then, so you have, I called her. She immediately picked up on that I wasn't doing that great. And so I told her, I said, yeah, Uncle Steve passed away. And as soon as I said it, I started crying. Like, it was immediate. It was just this, all start coming out, because it had been in here up to that point, And then once I've said it, it's just like this, it became real to me, and the emotions like attached themselves. It was something different. The processing was different once you start saying it aloud, So it struck me how alike that is in worship, where we come to God with good and bad things, and also in prayer, I think, but particularly in worship, it's important to speak aloud those truths, and it's important to bring those frustrations and to process and allow ourselves to feel the emotions of that, because He is the constant person throughout that, and we are the ones that change, So
somehow declaring that together changes the reality of it a bit, which, it's a bit of a shameless plug, I guess, but we are going to do a series in July. We were just talking about it on Friday called Help I Feel. And if I've learned anything from the therapeutic model in my own experience, it's that you really can't move forward until you give words to what it is you're dealing with, which is, you've made some observations even in the text, how David in particular seemed to be really, really good at taking his emotions, and whether congregationally or individually, putting words to them and allowing that experience to change him.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think there's over 60 chapters devoted to David throughout the Bible, and so we are privy to seeing all a range of emotions and things that he's gone through, and he's put a lot of those down in a very raw form in the Psalms, and so to read Samuel, First and Second Samuel, where a lot of David's story is written, and then to read the Psalms in parallel is a pretty powerful thing, because you can put a bit more context to some of these emotions and songs and things that he writes. For me, with Uncle Steve, like it was interesting the next day, because I was leading worship and we sang Constant, and there was one phrase in there which was healing Saviour, and I thought, that was full on, because Uncle Steve was neither healed nor saved, so what does that mean? What does that mean now? Like, that's a bit full on, but really it's that intentional choice to say that God is greater and that He has a plan, and that I put my trust and my faith in Him. And so in checking in Samuel, I'm reading a book about David at the moment, and so I came across this interesting verse, which I think is one that you're referring to, which is it's 1 Samuel 30 verse 6, and it says, and David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, because they'd just finished this massive battle, and every man was grieving for his son and for his daughters. But David strengthened himself in Jehovah, the God, and his God, sorry. And that really spoke to me. David strengthened himself in Jehovah, his God. The intentionality of that, the coming to God, knowing that that's where he finds his strength,
So you're saying he strengthened himself. It seems like the implication of what you're saying is that he strengthened himself via the verbalization of the raw emotion.
And the verbalization and the acknowledgement that it is in God's control. Because I think that's the whole point, especially in worship, is we come to worship and we know it's out of our control. And that's exactly the point why we worship. It's out of our control. It's all in God's control. So we bring these things to Him, and in our acknowledging that He is far greater than anything we could ever hope to conceive, we are strengthened by that. And it's something that continues into eternity too,
Take us through that psalm, because it's on the back of the mind map as well, but Kate did something this week where she diagrammed a psalm and kind of showed this playing itself out, and it was very insightful for me just to see the full cycle of what you're describing play itself out in a psalm.
Yeah, I think so. David being the writer of the Psalms, and just the value of looking to those when you're reading about his life. So Psalm 56 I thought was a great example of how he puts those raw emotions to bear. So it says, be merciful to me, my God. So straight away he's acknowledging that God is bigger,
Even though his circumstances suggest he might not be. Exactly,
yeah. For my enemies are in hot pursuit, and all day long they press their attack. So these are the trials that he's bringing forth. To the next slide there, thanks, Jamie. He says, when I'm afraid, I put my trust in you, in God, whose word I praise. In God I trust, and I am not afraid. If you said those words over and over and over again, I'm hopeful that you would start to believe them. Like, that's the David strengthening himself in God. It's really exactly what it was saying in Samuel. And then by the time he gets to that last verse, in verse 4, he says, what can mere mortals do to me? That's the power of God. It's one verse just to really get to that point. Yeah.
so there's that cycle of I'm freaking out, people are nothing, and it does begin to answer that question then of what's the value of singing. And I think one of the things that I really wanted to begin to wrestle with and to become clear as we think about what we do on a Sunday morning is it's not a bunch of stuff leading up to a sermon. It's a whole bunch of stuff working together, from the greeters on the steps to the people behind the scenes making coffee to the people who are setting up the nursery for your kids. It's all about creating a context, and then you guys, the band and the tech team, creating a context by which we can begin to verbalize whether it's like, God, I'm not even convinced you're real, or this diagnosis is freaking me out, or, man, I had a lot of victory this week.
Yeah.
It's the value of verbalizing things to God.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned like people that greet or do coffee, because that's where the expression starts, I think, So that's where the expression starts to God, or anything that you're intentionally choosing to be there to glorify God in that way.
And that the whole experience is designed to go like, okay, let's re-center ourselves, or in the case of those of you exploring Jesus, to re-entertain the idea of what it would mean to center myself around these ideas and move forward into them on a weekly basis. If
we just hopped up and started chatting, that would be the focus would be so different, Yeah.
Repetition is also something that you have some really strong ideas about. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think just the value of repetition, why we sing the same songs at different, times, or why we even repeat choruses or bridges sometimes is, I read a great essay, and if I was good at remembering and referencing as well as Caleb and Adam are, I would tell you who wrote it. But it was a smart person, and and they wrote, that repetition is the deep planting in our souls glorious truths, and it's so important from a young age. I think to have those to return to, that forms your core.
Which is interesting, because we know that companies spend millions of dollars writing jingles, and what you're saying is when you put a truth to a melody, it somehow is more memorable. I had an experience I was telling Kate earlier about this last week. My youngest and I were driving to the store, and I don't remember where we were exactly, but he apparently saw a one-way sign and instantly started singing a song I wasn't even familiar with, but that Jenny and Jody and the Schroeders and that whole kids team sing on a Sunday morning, and he was singing this truth ultimately, and I had no idea. I thought he just thought I was going the wrong direction. So there's something about that repetition.
Yeah, I think I know that's a huge value of everyone in Narrate Kids. That's something that I've heard Jenny talk about a lot, is the foundation of Scripture in the music that they do.
So if we shift then, so there's this value that singing has emotionally, relationally, spiritually for us individually, for us as one. What is this process of singing together, which is certainly a call that we see in the Scriptures, like God has constantly called people to this weekly experience. I think another question is, what does that do for God? Like, does he need us? Like, I picture it like Monsters, Inc. Like, does he need us like filling up that tank for him by singing to him, or what does that do for him?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I think, so I kind of netted out in some of the trivia stuff this week, and I found that worship is mentioned over 8,000 times. I think 8,629 times in 8,600. Wow. Yeah.
Just go general, and then they'll believe you.
Yeah, over that in the Bible. So obviously, it's something that God values. It talks repeatedly about how it delights God. And I was talking about this particular subject actually with Tim. He's a good friend of mine from, I was in Colorado last week, and he's actually an Australian guy, but he's the guy that put me in touch with Narrate. He's a worship pastor down there.
And a Bronco fan.
And an Australian, yeah. So.
Yeah, there you go.
He's a Bronco fan.
But I think this is an important question, because if we're not careful, we portray God as an egotist who needs us to reaffirm his value to him.
That's right, yeah. And so when we were chatting about it, he immediately just said to me, and it really spoke to me, was, well, I know what it does for me when my son runs into the room and gives me a big hug and tells me that he loves me. And I thought, Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool. Like, that's such a small glimpse of what it must be like to have such worship and praise echoing literally around the world, especially around Sundays. What it does for God, that he delights that his creation knows who he is and wants to connect with him and want to share their life with him. And if they've got troubles, they'll bring them to him, And if they're struggling with something, or if they care about somebody else, that they'll be praying and connecting to God intentionally with that they see somebody else that has a need and would intentionally help them out. Like there's so much that it does for God. And it does, and then in turn that does for us, and it's like a cycle, because as we revel in Him, we start to revel in the purpose that we have, that He gives us, and it keeps going back and forth.
Yeah, it reminds me. I mean, it takes me back to that. We did a series this winter called Crazy Rare, and so much of that was about to assume they know it isn't enough. In fact, unexpressed gratitude, we said, is experienced as ingratitude. And it's a reminder that so much of what worship is a God going, hey, I'd appreciate a thanks as well. I would appreciate. So not only is there what it does for us, but God's role in that, which is what
I was going to say, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Him.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's,
So Kate has, speaking of making a case for how your disposition changes through group participation, you have kind of a neat demonstration that you'll wrap up here with.
Yes, I do, yeah. Because everybody loves participation at this church. That was one of the first things that I noticed when I came here. Wow. Sorry, I just can hear myself right there. So this I thought was just a great example to finish up, just to demonstrate what it means. If I was going to do these actions by myself at home, or if I was going to share them with you, the difference in the energy and the difference in what we can create together. In fact, that's one of the things that we say a lot in the worship team, is that we come together to do what we can't do alone. And so we like to paint that picture of like start worshipping in the morning, even before you guys get here, kind of warm up the room and can continue that way. So when I'm right in front of you, what we're going to do is going to create a rainstorm. So I'm right in front of you, and I'm going to do a cool action. If you guys can just do the action that I'm doing and continue doing that action until I get back in front of you, and I'll be switching it up. So I just kind of go across the room like a wave. You ready? There was a slight murmur. Okay. Here we go. So if you've got a cough, you might want to put it down because you don't want to miss out, and can go nuts in the middle, and you know what I mean. So here we go. Here we go. I'll keep standing in front of you until you guys can't do it. So.
wish you guys could see just how all of your dispositions changed, which is kind of crazy. Let's just pray, and these guys are going to lead us into a song. God, I guess my prayer is that we're provoked to think about the value that you place, not just on being together and verbalizing things for ourselves, but the value you place on us expressing our thanks to you. And God, I just say I'm sure on behalf of all of us that we're so grateful that you don't ask us to filter it, that you are secure enough to hear all of it, even our biggest doubts and angers and frustrations, that you can handle it. And that what you've given us, especially in the Psalms, is this healthy example, not only of what happens when we give verbal expression and how you can begin to turn our thinking back towards healthier things, but God, that you can take it, and that you'd prefer to know all of it, not just the stuff that fits in the confines of neat and organized and churchy. God, thanks for the opportunity and to our idea to be a community together, and that we don't individually have to always bring good stuff, that collectively we bring the good stuff and the bad stuff, enter into the music every week from different perspectives. Jesus.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.